My name is Marlowe Katoney. I am an American artist who happens to be Navajo and who also happens to be a weaver. I am from Winslow, Arizona, and I have always considered myself to be a painter by trade. I've been doing that for about 20 years or so. I went to school at the University of Arizona. Prior to that, I was painting, but I didn't get the classical training that you would get until I went to the university, and that's when I got my background in drawing and painting, and that's something that I pull over and apply to my weaving. There's weavers out there who come from a long line of weavers and they consider themselves generational weavers, and that's because of the techniques that they've had were passed down from one generation to the next, and that's their family trait. But I myself, I don't consider myself a generational weaver. I've always watched my grandma weave since I was really young, maybe about 4 or 5 is when I remember seeing my grandmother weave on both my dad's side and my mom's side of the family. So I basically had the idea of what I knew what the tools did. I knew what the sticks on the warp did, what their function was. As far as applying the yarn to the warp, that was something I learned with time, and it wasn't, of course, until I seen and did it myself that I actually started to build my own technique. I consider myself to be somewhat self-taught. My grandmother showed me how to put up my first loom for me, and I kind of just went from there. She gave me the yarn, and I just went at it. And that's how it went, but it wasn't long after that, after my first, I think it may have even been my second or third rug, I started trying for pictorial type work. If you look as far back as you can into pictorial weaving, you begin to see elements of what was contemporary then incorporated into the weavings, whether it's a truck, whether it's the trading posts, ice cream cones, that sort of thing. You see those things incorporated into the weaving, and those were things that were new to them then at that particular time, but I try to incorporate those things to keep within that tradition. As far as technique, which a lot of people are questioning when they see my work, you know, when you come from a discipline of art and you come from a background of painting, whether it be painting or sculpture, and you have that background, you know that experimentation is important. It's vital to your exploration as an artist, because you know you're going to have to try something new in order to get that technique, to try to get that the caliber of art that you're really striving for. Weaving is one of those things that's less forgiving. When you're actually going into putting a design down, you kind of have to have a plan. For me, I have a rough idea of what I'm going to do, and then I start putting down the weft. In the past, I've made friends with several weavers, both Navajo and non-Navajo, and they would consider them, so I would consider them pictorial weavers. And a lot of what they do is they'll draw things out and they'll make a cartoon for the back. And I've tried that before, and I've applied it to the back of my loom to have a cartoon in the back, and it never worked for me because my comb would either tear up the cartoon in the back, and it was just completely useless, and that's just how things went. So I would often just, I would make either a sketch and I would put it on the side, but I would diagram it. And it never turns out exactly like you want it to work, but you work it to scale because your warp strings are counted out and you kind of have it on a grid. This particular project that I'm working on for SAR, I propose to do a Pietà, and you'll hear more about it if you're able to come to my talk in November, because I'm really gathering my thoughts about it. Collectively, it's about lots of things. I think anytime you're doing a work of art, it really reflects the human nature or the human condition, about of what you see in a while, because I think an artist's job is really to interpret the world around you, how you see it, because you bear witness to it. And you kind of leave open-ended doors, so you're kind of vague within those, within that perspective. You don't want to be too precise. You want the viewer to participate as almost as a protagonist. When you look at the piece, you begin to put the pieces together, and then when you're finished with the piece, looking at it, you may have to revisit it, but you walk away with a knowledge that you didn't have before. And for me, as the artist, I'm also the protagonist, because when I'm approaching the piece or I'm designing a piece, a pictorial piece, because it has narrative, I approach the piece knowing that I'm going to have some kind of message or another, and when I start putting it together, elements start coming together, and as a participant, as the maker of the piece, I'm also the protagonist. So I also end up walking away from the piece with another type of knowledge. You know, one of the things that's really interesting about I think all Native cultures, all Native American cultures have this, or all cultures for that matter, but I see it more. I see it more in my own culture, that we deal with things with a kind of humor. That particular piece that I had made was in response to my aunt's garden. She over the past 10 years or so, she's cultivated a really great garden. Every year they have a harvest festival at our family's house, and she usually gives away whatever she has left over that she's not using to the rest of the family. I have never really got to participate, and the one year that I was home in Winslow, I wanted to participate, and I had to be at the Museum of Northern Arizona show because I was demonstrating. And I was demonstrating that year, and I had just started this rug, and I was trying to come up with ideas of what I wanted to do. So I already knew I was going to do a tree of life. So it turns out this particular rug were my sentiments about not being able to go. So I had the angry birds all over the all over the corn stalk, and they were doing various things. And on one of the little lower branches on the bottom, you see a little blue bird, and that was supposed to represent me. His eyes were just big, and he just looked really disappointed, and he had the angry birds flying all over the place. But yeah, that's what that story was about. But it was me approaching that situation with a little bit of humor. That piece went into the Heard Museum's permanent collection a few years ago. I had taken it, after it was finished, I had taken it to the Heard Museum's gathering of weavers, which usually happens at the end of November or the first week in December. They haven't had it in a while, but that was the first rug that I had taken, and the Heard Museum picked it up and they put it in their permanent collection. Not long after that, I had found out that they were going to put together one exhibition, and it was on pictorial weaving, and they used it for that show, and I was quite happy because it was my first museum exhibition with a textile, so I was pretty happy about that. Then the following year, they put together another exhibition. They approached me and asked me if I was interested in allowing Dave Shaddix, he's a Lego artist from Phoenix, Arizona. He was going to be recreating some works of art from the Heard Museum collection, and they had selected my rug to see if I would be interested in allowing him to recreate it for this Lego exhibition. And I said yes, because it was a wonderful opportunity to see my textile larger than life. The rug that I had made, the Angry Bird, wasn't very big. It was like 26 by 23 inches, something to that effect. It wasn't big. So when they had designed it and they had sent me copies of it, they had later told me about how many pieces it was going to take, and it was something like 56,000 pieces to put it together, which is really amazing to me. So it was a really great opportunity to put that together, and that was for their Lego exhibition, and a number of other artists also participated, but that was a fun thing. I haven't personally heard anything negative from any other weavers, because I think to some extent they know that experimentation has always been a part of the weaving tradition in Navajo culture. But I think with collectors sometimes they don't know how to feel about it, which is interesting, and it's fine. And I was listening to a lecture from somebody else not too long ago. I can't remember if it was a lecture, if it was a friend of mine, but they had said that with collectors, a lot of times they want to see how long you're going to be in the game, because they don't want to invest in your work right away. They want to see how long you're going to be in there, because they want to they really want to collect something that's from somebody who's going to continue to work for a long time, and I understand that. But as far as my work is concerned, I'm really grateful for opportunities like the School for Advanced Research, the fellowship that I got here, because it allows me to work in the margins where nobody else is working. So I'm able to experiment a little bit with design, but I do produce some traditional work, and I'm happy to do it, because to some extent the act of doing it, the process, informs my contemporary work, if that makes sense. Because I'm sitting here and I'm weaving, and some other weavers may or may not agree with me, but a lot of times when you're weaving, the creative process can really take a lot out of you, especially when you're improvising in some areas, because you're really thinking about color concept and color combinations. So yeah, it can really be tiring sometimes. Part of my artist statement when I had applied for the fellowship, I had told them that I wanted to work from the collection, and that I wanted to integrate the human figure into the piece that I was going to work on for the SAR collection. And it took a lot of thinking about what I wanted to do. I had done several things. I've had done one technique that I called fly splitting, and I've been experimenting a lot with hatching, both of which I haven't really seen a whole lot of in Navajo weaving, but I wanted to incorporate some of that with some of what I knew. But I knew I was going to do a Pietà. So here I have some of the sketches of what I was going to work from. And whenever I start with any type of figure drawing, I always work with gesture first. Then I'll start defining the figure a little bit more. Then I'll get it down to where it was. But before I started working, I looked at a lot of Pietàs that other artists have done. Michelangelo, Van Gogh, those are all works that I looked at, and I really wanted to see what I'd be working on. But these are just my preliminary sketches. Before I've tried working with cartoons, but the width of the loom wasn't very big, and how I had it set up is my comb would always come through the warp, and it would hit the paper in the back, and it would tear it up, and it would never work. How I have this set up is I have it taped to the back of the loom, which it doesn't work as well for me, just because when you're sitting at the loom, the angle isn't right. But it does give me a little bit of a guide. So what I did is I made marks over the warp strings to fill in some of the area and to kind of give me a guide as well. And when I'm working at the loom, the angle, because there's a space between the warp strings and the cartoon in the back, you're still looking at an angle. So that's what kind of you really have to be careful about when you're weaving that makes sure that all the proportions are going to come out right. The bottom is basically what the filler that I'm using. The main part is the figure over the top, and then eventually I'm gonna work another figure in, probably over the top, overlooking the reclining figure. The yarns that I use, I get all my yarn from RB Burnham Trading Company. They have a wonderful dye person there who does all of their dyeing. I believe her name's Mary Begay. They're able to get a wide variety of vegetable dyes, and you can tell which colors they are because they're the really soft pastel colors. I do use some aniline dyes. I get that yarn from this place in Window Rock, but it's brown sheep. I love the texture of the yarn. I have to work with a variety of colors, anywhere from about 25 colors to, and for this particular rug, it's going to be all the way up to 43 colors. So that would be a problem. If I had to dye all my own colors, I would probably do one rug like every 3 years or something. I don't know. I just couldn't imagine trying to get that variety of colors. So it's easier for me just to purchase my colors from someone who already knows what they're doing. But if I were to do a traditional design, and all I needed was maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 colors, I would probably do the dyeing myself if I knew how. But with my pictorial work, because I work with a wide variety of colors, I would prefer just to purchase the yarn from somewhere else. But not so long ago, I was asked to be a part of a board of advisors to a weaving group that wanted to put together a show or a conference for Navajo weaving, which I thought was great. And one of the proposed projects, everybody is proposing projects or an idea or theme for it. And my theme was weaving as language, because I feel that weaving is so embedded in the type of colloquialisms, I'll call them, that we may have inherited from the person who taught us how to weave. And I see that with generational weaving. And it is like a kind of language because it's regional. It is a type of art that we've inherited, like the types of techniques that we use, because the techniques will vary from weaving family to weaving family. And I've been fortunate enough to work with a few weavers who have taught me different types of techniques. I had the good fortune of being able to, the collection here at the School for Advanced Research, I've had to, it's that I can look at it anytime I want to. And one of the things that I did here with the collection is I was able to pull out several rugs that were of interest to me. I think for me, I respond most to color. Because I was a painter before, I responded to a lot of these really bright colors, and it was so funny because some of them were early Germantown rugs. They weren't eye dazzlers, they were more, I knew that they were Germantown rugs and they were mixtures of yarns. Some of them were plied yarns that were definitely Germantown, and then they were mixed with regular spun yarn. So that was interesting to me because that's how I work a lot of times, because I'll use mixtures of yarns that aren't necessarily all the same texture or manufactured or that sort of thing.